Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SFF180. Thank you so much for joining me. Thomas Wagner, your host here, as always. And I am very happy today to be doing my first ever interview video for the channel. It's a new thing. And for this interview, I'm quite pleased to be talking to David D. Levine, a wonderful writer and a very nice gentleman. Hi, David. Thank you for joining me. Hi.
Hello. Glad to be here.
And we had a chance to meet for the very first time at the Nebula ceremony this year, and that was great fun. So where you were a finalist in the short story category, weren't you, for your story Damage?
Yes, I was. Very proud of that.
Yes, well, you should be. It's a fine story. And so, all right then, David has a new book that is releasing tomorrow from Tor. It's called Arabella of Mars. This was a book quite long time ago, at the very beginning of the year, when I put together my 16 and 16 anticipated reads list. This was included on it, and it is finally coming out tomorrow. Also, by now, you should have seen my review appear on the channel. Should have been this morning, just before the interview went up. So go ahead and check that out. But we're here today to talk with David about the book and about his creative process generally. So let's get into it. What do you say?
Hey, sounds good.
Okay. This is your debut novel, correct?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, but you have been writing science fiction for quite a while, haven't you? I mean, you've in short fiction, I think 10, 11 years ago now or so, you won the Hugo.
I made my first sale in 2001, and I won the Hugo in 2006.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, for Tick, Tick, Tick. Yeah.
For Tick, 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 yes.
Okay.
And I've had, that was, Tale of the Golden Eagle was a previous Hugo nominee. I actually was up for the Campbell and the Hugo in the same year, and that was in the the third year of my professional career. Then I've had two Hugo nominations, won one, lost one, two Campbells, lost them both, and two Nebula nominations, lost them both. But I still hope to have a Nebula to bookend my Hugo at some point.
Yeah, probably. Well, that's still the 3 years into the career. Getting that level of acclaim is quite a feat.
I've been very fortunate. Yes.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about that because you have now come into your first novel with a whole lot of writing experience under your belt.
Yes.
It's different for every writer, right? Everybody's an individual. They have their own method that kind of gets them to where they want to be and they need to be creatively in their development. What to you were, I think, the benefits, would you say? I mean, how did concentrating for so many years on short fiction before attempting your first novel, help you develop as a writer?
Well, the reason I went into short fiction first was because of basically a mistaken, outdated idea of what a science fiction writer's career should be like. I mean, I grew up. My father was a science fiction fan. Well, not a convention going fan, but a reader. Back in the days of the pulps in the 30s and 40s. So I grew up with Asimov and Heinlein and Clarke and all that on the shelves. I still have quite a few of my parents' books on my shelves now. And so I read not only the fiction of the time, but a lot of the metafictional stuff, things like the introductions to the short story collections and sometimes memoirs and biographies. So I knew what a science fiction writer's career was supposed to be like. You would start off by writing short stories for the pulp magazines, and then you would build up a name with a short fiction career, and then eventually you'd probably put some of those short stories together into a fix-up novel, and then eventually you'd begin to start writing novels. And this was not even true when I started writing short fiction, and is even less true today. But that was what I thought. I mean, as you can tell from looking at me, I may be a new novelist, but I'm not a young novelist. I was one of the oldest people in my Clarion West class of 2000, and so I went in with a large backlog of life experience and particularly writing experience because I was a technical writer for over 20 years, during which time I didn't write a lick of fiction. Because it was too much like the day job. I'd written a lot of science fiction stories in high school and college, but all through my technical writing career, I didn't write any fiction at all. And during that time, I built up certain habits of composing text, composing sentences, paragraphs, how to lead a person to a conclusion. There's a lot of skills overlap between nonfiction and fiction writing, obviously.
Right.
I also built up a lot of bad habits that I had to break myself of, but I got some basic text management disciplines. So I really wish that I had started writing science fiction, started writing and trying to publish science fiction in my teenage and college years, like so many of my peers. But on the other hand, I think my fiction is much better from having labored for so many years in the technical fiction minds, technical writing minds.
Hmm.
And my novels, I think, have also improved from the years I've spent in the short fiction minds. Because when
Right.
you write short fiction, you have to do the whole story in a fairly short space
You
of
got to
time. It
get
has to have,
in, get the job done, get it
yeah,
out. Yeah.
but the thing is, it has to be a fully formed organism. It has to have
Hmm.
characters, plot, setting. It has to have a point. It has to be about something. It has to have, I mean, the word theme is, I won't say overused, but the problem is that so many people mean different things by it. So I don't like to use the term theme. But I say that that any story, whether long or short, has to be about something. And that's one of the things that I learned is writing short stories is how to combine all those things: characters, plot, world building, and for lack of a better word, theme. And so doing the same thing at novel length is definitely a difference of quality rather than just quantity. But I think that a lot of the lessons I learned from writing short stories are definitely applicable. I also, during that time, wrote three unsold novels. And I
Sure.
think that and although it was, I mean, I didn't start writing my first novel until after I'd won a Hugo, and I thought, okay, fine, my name is established. I should be able to sell a novel now.
Hmm.
And a lot of people told me that that first novel was saleable, but as it happens, it did not sell. Despite the fact that there was actually an editor who wanted to buy it, but his boss wouldn't let him. But so
Yeah.
I wrote three novels before finally writing the fourth one that sold. And I think again, the process of writing those unsold novels was an important part of learning how to craft a novel.
Right.
And I don't know whether those first three will ever see the light of day. Right now, I'm busy on Arabella and its sequels, so
Yeah.
that's not going to be not something I need to worry about for a year or two.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of trunk novels, right? I mean, it's like you have early ideas that you need to get out of your system, and maybe that's their whole point is that they're
Hmm.
just they're educational exercises, and maybe they're not meant to see the light of day, or maybe someday you can go back if you choose to do it, but you don't have to because now you have a direction, sense of direction you didn't have before, right?
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and I mean, we talk about opening up our old files and being so embarrassed by them. And the problem that I have is when I open up an old story, I don't have a lot of unsold stories. I've been fortunate enough to sell almost everything I've written. I have four novels that I trunked in the first couple of years, four short stories that I trunked in the first years of my career. But apart from that, I've sold everything I've written. And when I go back to an older story, and open it up again, what I find is that my head snaps back to the same space it was in when I was writing it. And I love it just as much now as I did when I was writing it. So I don't have that thing of being able to go back and be embarrassed by my earlier work and see, okay, I'm a better writer now. I can punch it up. I think any story has a certain self, a certain itness of it. When you first put it down, if the first draft is broken, then no amount of rewrite and no even a complete ground up rewrite of setting that draft aside and writing a completely new draft on the same idea. If the first draft doesn't work, then I think subsequent drafts are also going to not work. Which is not to say that if the first draft works, you can't break it because I've done that.
Yeah.
Uh, but so so I think
Because what's wrong with the piece is just at a much deeper level,
yeah,
and yeah.
yeah, some
So.
ideas just don't work. And the thing is that even if the original idea is sound, when you
Mhm.
put it into fixed form for the first time, that kind of crystallizes some things in your mind that I find for myself are very difficult to get away from. But
Mhm.
my writing process is I write very, very clean first drafts. I write fairly slow. And I write, I've seen a lot of people talk about this, that I will revise every time I sit down to write. I'll look over the last few pages I've written and I'll kind of revise and smooth, and then I'll start writing new stuff. And then as I'm writing any individual sentence, any individual paragraph, I keep massaging it until I'm happy with it, and then I move on to the next. So my drafts come slow, but when I reach the end of a draft, and I almost always write sequentially.
Mhm.
And when I reach the end of a draft, it is in publishable shape, technically, at least, and sometimes more than technically. But I will certainly seek out feedback. That's a really important thing. That's a really, I think, vital part of the process of improving your craft is you
Uh,
have to get feedback.
You get your alpha
Uh,
readers.
Um, I call them critique partners, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You have to have people who have good judgment on what makes a good story, and can express it, because there's an awful lot of people who are very sophisticated readers who nonetheless do not have the necessary vocabulary to tell you why it didn't work for them.
Right.
So I've
Yeah.
worked with critique partners ever since I went to Clarion, and I'm still using critique partners.
Yeah.
The one substitute for a good critique group is an exceptional editor. And I have been fortunate enough to work with a couple of exceptional editors in my time. And if you have an exceptional editor, then just one person may be able to substitute for a critique group. But the thing about a group is, if you hear an opinion from one person, you're kind of going, well, do I really believe that person? But if you're in a group of 4 or 5 people and 3 of them say the same thing, that's probably something you really need to listen to.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I have for a few years I was one of like the little group instructors helping out with the Armadillicon Writers Workshop here in
Mhm.
Austin, and a consistent thing that I saw happening among these aspiring noob writers was nobody wanted to write short fiction.
Yes.
Everybody was bringing first chapters of novels,
Yes.
and I felt. I mean, on the one hand, yes, let's encourage creative freedom, but at the same time, I felt that the workshop maybe was doing them a disservice by allowing them to bring a first chapter of a novel, mainly because it was sort of putting ambition a bit over like a realistic assessment of craft at that point.
Hmm.
And first chapters of novels that are just on their own are essentially impossible to critique
Yeah.
in anything other than like a technical,
Well, you
syntax.
can critique it in terms of how well it works as a first chapter, and first chapters are vital.
Yeah,
You know,
at least
if
in
you
terms of
don't,
maybe making you want to see more.
yeah, if you do not hook, well,
Yeah.
the first chapter is really important. If you don't hook the reader in the first chapter, you're sunk.
Hmm.
So the amount of time we spend on first chapters is, I think, appropriate. The
Hmm.
thing that critiquing a short story can do, or critiquing or reviewing or even reading a short story can do, that reading part of a novel can't, is it tells you whether the thing actually works when you come to the end.
Hmm.
Does it have a satisfying conclusion? Does it have a shape? You
Yeah.
know,
Does
and
it
that's
work as a whole?
one thing that you can't do. A workshop protocol that I've participated in several times very effectively is you get together with a bunch of novelists and everybody reads everybody else's first chapters and synopsis. And then everybody reads 2 full novels, which means that everybody gets two people reading their full novel.
Oh,
And
okay.
so this is a way to get feedback on the full shape of a novel, and also feedback from multiple people on the first chapters and synopsis. And the first chapters and synopsis are important because that's how you sell the thing.
Hmm.
And that's a good way of getting critique on a novel without everybody having. I mean, you get together with 9 people, you try and read 9 novels. That's more
Hmm.
time than anybody could spare.
Well, sure.
Yeah. So the writing short fiction is a great way to improve your craft, but I recognize that, for one thing, and this is something that as an award winning short fiction
Man who
writer,
knows his thing. Yeah.
I can tell you that short fiction doesn't get any attention whatsoever. I
Mm.
have gotten far more buzz, far more reviews and attention off of my first novel before it even came out than I ever got for even my most highly regarded short stories.
Hmm.
If you look at, go to the, look at the end of the year, do a Google search on best science fiction of the year, and I
Right.
guarantee you will see 9 out of 10 of those posts, or maybe even 99 out of 100 of those posts. Best science fiction of the year, all novels.
All
They're
novels.
not going to
Yeah.
discuss short fiction at all. There's It's not completely true that the only people who read short fiction are other short fiction writers, but it's distressingly close to true.
Hmm.
And so I started writing my first novel, as I said, right around the time I won the Hugo. And so that was 2006. So I've been trying to sell a novel for 10 years.
Okay.
And I've been trying to sell a novel and really desperately wanting to sell a novel for I mean, not the fortune so much, although there is more money in novels, but
Hmm.
for the attention
Yeah.
that just I am one of those writers who writes for attention. I want to have lots
Yeah.
of people reading and talking about my stuff.
Naturally. Naturally.
Yeah. And money to me, and I'm not doing it to make a living. Money to me is a marker of how much respect somebody has for something. If somebody's willing to pay me more money for something, that means that they really care about it. And so that's why I generally do not write for markets that pay less than pro rates.
Sure. Sure.
But again, it's a mark of respect rather than because I'm trying to make a living off of it. Because you certainly can't make a living off of a short story, and it's
Yeah.
very difficult to make a living even off of novels.
Right.
But novels, the more money that's in the novel space is a marker of how much more attention and respect novels have in this field.
Yeah,
And
over and
and
above short fiction, which is
yeah,
interesting though, because we're in a bit of I don't want to say golden age or what have you, but this is a time when short fiction publishing in science fiction, I guess it's evolved, but there
it's
is
pretty
still
darn good. Yeah.
there's still a lot of it going on. Not now just with the actual in print magazines maybe fading a bit in some of their influence, but now of course you have online. You've got Tor.com and Lightspeed, and Beneath Seasonal Skies, and Strange Horizons, and all of these online venues that are
Clark's
just
World. Yeah.
yeah, Clarksford. They're devouring Uncanny. They're
Yes.
devouring just short fiction, and writers are producing it, so there on the one hand does seem to be like a really exciting clique of attention surrounding all of this, but at the same time, I guess there is this attitude of, but you're not a real writer, and you're not going to get the real buzz and the real love until you've got that book.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's what everyone asks, right? It's like when you get
when
acclaim
you're
for
going to write a book, yeah.
yeah, see, that's okay.
Yeah, and I remember talking with Gordon Van Gelder years ago about him saying that when he was the editor of FNSF, when he said that so many people when they start writing novels, he said when they start writing novels, I lose them, and it
Mhm.
certainly is the case that I haven't had a chance to turn out much short fiction in the past couple of years while I've been working on
Mhm.
Arabella. I mean, Arabella's been in process since 2011. I
Mhm.
started writing it in 20 I think the first note in my notes file, I just looked at it the other day, was 11/11/11. So November
Wow.
11th 2011 was when I first started
Mhm.
putting my vague thoughts about what this book was going to be into concrete form, and I think I started drafting at the end of 2011.
Mm.
And so it took me 2 years to write. That's 2013. It took me 1 year after I submitted it to get an acceptance, and it was sitting at one publisher for that entire year, and then 2 years between acceptance and publication. So it's a long haul.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and I think most writers, I mean, there are natural novelists and there are natural short story writers. And today I think most science fiction and fantasy writers are natural novelists rather than natural short story writers, because I've talked to so many people who say I've tried to write short fiction and every time I try it just turns into another novel. Um, I think there is such a thing as a natural length. I It's probably true that my natural length is short story, but then again, it's possible to level up those skills. It's
Mhm.
possible to become a novelist. I think that I'm very proud of Arabella, and I think people, the early reviews are very positive, so I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good about the book.
Well, let's talk about
Um,
Arabella now.
yeah,
So
let's
this
talk
is
about the
like a
book. Yeah.
perfect segue into that,
Hmm.
because we've got this is the writing advice segment of the interview
Yes.
is now behind us, and let's talk about Arabella of Mars.
Hmm.
This is a book that combines now, without getting super spoilery, you have brought in a whole lot of genre. It's a big mashup of
It's Regency interplanetary space. It's a Regency interplanetary airship adventure. That was
there we
the
go.
forward pitch that I put in the first sentence of my pitch letter, and continues to be a good description of the
That's
book.
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking, all right, on the one hand, we have planetary romance, but then we've got, I guess, a bit of steampunk influence, although we're well before the Victorian period.
Yes.
So, talk a little bit about kind of this creative, process that went into, putting together this enormous literary salad
Yeah.
of ideas and influences.
Yeah.
What?
I describe it as steampunkish. I don't mind if people call it steampunk, but to
Yeah.
me it isn't quite steampunk, because steampunk is really kind of fixated on that Civil War Victorian
Yeah.
era. And
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 really,
there is
we'd only
yeah.
be looking at like the automata and some like so it's maybe more like gear punk or whatever whatever you know uh, kind of dash punk
I
suffix or
forget
something.
one of the blurbs that I got. It might have been no, it wasn't Kim Stanley Robinson. Anyway, one of the blurbs that I got used the term sailpunk,
Oh, there
and
we are. All
I'm
right.
happy with that.
Yeah,
It is yeah.
that's
It's
ideal.
not, even though there are clockworks to it. I don't think it's quite clockpunk. Jay Lake, of course, was
That's
the inventor of
yeah,
clockpunk,
that's what I
and I
was
don't
looking
think
for.
I don't think
Yeah.
this quite counts as clockpunk.
Hmm.
And the thing is, there was steam power in the Regency. but not a lot of it. There were you'd see very large steam powered things like printing presses, but steam power at the as it were retail level did not exist yet. So I think I don't describe Arabella as steampunk because there's no steam in it, but
Right.
there certainly is coal burning furnaces and automata. So
Yeah.
it's got that steampunk feel. And here's the thing: is it really is all about feel. It is all about what does
Yeah.
this book feel like?
Yeah.
Because where Arabella came from, as with many things in life, it came from failure. So I had written three science fiction novels. The first two were interstellar, involved in interstellar travel, aliens, and I would not describe them as space opera, and they're not hard SF, but they're definitely science fiction with aliens in. The third one I wrote was hard SF, set on Mars, called "The Loneliest Girl on Mars," which is not to be confused with Arabella of Mars. It's a hard SF YA book about the only child on a Mars in sometime in the next century, which has a total planetary population of about 60 human beings.
Mm.
So anyway, so right around the time I was finishing up that third book, The Loneliest Girl on Mars, my first two books were going around and around and around. Publishers and agents at the time, this was about 2000, and well, it would have been 2010, 2011, were telling me science fiction doesn't sell in just so many words. I mean, even the editor of a science fiction press was telling me science fiction does not sell. He said that to me at the bar at a convention. And I'm not sure I believe it, but certainly enough people were believing it that it was making it difficult for me to get an airing. Even people who said they liked the book, they said, "I like this book, but science fiction doesn't sell."
Mm.
So I have written both science fiction and fantasy. That's why my first collection is called Space Magic, because it is a mix of science fiction and fantasy. But really, science fiction is where my heart's at,
Yeah.
and so
And
I
all of
have
this,
to.
and all of these warnings that you were getting, would this have been right around the time that the racks were dominated by like urban fantasy and that sort of thing, and SF really was, you could see it being pushed to the back burner, and
Yeah.
only a very few people were actually able to publish that sort of thing.
Yeah, 2009, 10, 11,
Yeah.
somewhere in there. Yeah.
So
Okay. So,
anyway,
but science fiction is where my heart's at. So
right.
I looked through my ideas file. I have a big file with I only allow myself one line. So it's kind of like Twitter. Just of all my writing ideas. And I looked through my ideas file and I thought, which of these ideas is science fictional enough for my personal self-respect? Because it'd have to be there'd have to be some science fictional meat to it for me to stay interested for the 2 years or so it takes me to write a novel.
Definitely.
But at the same time, I wanted something with enough fantasy trappings that it would be more acceptable to the market. And the idea of sailing ships in a solar system full of air was the one that every time I looked away from it, it kind of dragged my eye back to it. And I had a number of different ideas, and I talked about them with some friends, and people were saying things like, when you talk about that sailing ships in space one, your eyes light up. And so, that was the one that clearly had hooks in my heart.
Mhm.
So it started out as just a world building concept, sky full of air, sailing ships in outer space. And the the fact that it was historical kind of follows from the idea of sailing ships in outer space. If it's sailing ships, then it's probably Age of Sail kind of thing.
Sure.
My first sketch of a plot was I had a troupe of players who were traveling to Mars and Venus in the 1600s, entertaining the troops.
Oh wow.
Uh, but I couldn't quite make that one into a plot. And also at that time, I was falling in love with the Napoleonic War stories of Patrick O'Brian.
Ah.
Patrick O'Brian is very popular with science fiction readers because it's got a science fictional attitude. It's pure history. There's no fantastic content, but it really feels like science fiction because it's a view into another world. A world not our own with different technology, and it pays a lot of attention to the technology. And there's action and suspense and fabulous characters because Patrick O'Brian is an amazing writer with a lot of humor actually. You might not realize when you look at it just how funny Patrick O'Brien is. But anyway, so I fell in love with Patrick O'Brien. So it very and also I must confess that I saw how much success Mary Robinette Kowal was having with her glamorous history set in the Regency. So I said, okay, the Napoleonic Wars is the place to be.
Right.
Um,
That's
so
where all the
so I
cool
started.
kids are.
That's where all the cool kids are. And so I brainstormed the plot with a friend of mine at Oricon couple 3 years ago now, and because she was much more into the Regency. I am a Patrick O'Brien reader. I have read Pride and Prejudice and a couple of the other Jane Austens. I have not read Higher. I am actually, considering that I've published a Regency, I am woefully undereducated on the Regency, and an awful lot of what you see on the page is just-in-time research,
Yeah.
which is why I can't write without the internet. Uh, but fortunately, there are some great resources out there. Questions like, how did Regency people get their water? It's just a Google away.
Yeah. It's
And
an
the thing is,
amazing world, isn't it?
you research something like how did Regency people get their water, and the answer will more plot ideas spring out of these little details. I discovered an amazing thing about privateers, which once I discovered this, it's like, oh my God, I have to use this. This is in book 2, so I will not tell you what it is
Okay,
because
that's fine.
spoilers.
Yeah, let's not.
Yes, but this is an amazing historical thing that nobody knows about and is just too cool not to use. Or like what happened to Nelson's body after he was killed. Too cool not to use.
Yeah.
So the research is a great driver.
Uh-huh.
And so yeah. So
And at the
Regency.
end of the day, it's fine if you're not the most well-versed reader in Regency fiction. The fact is that you knew just enough that you were able to achieve the ultimate goal, which really was to create something unique unto yourself, right? This
Just
was
dancing fast enough to
yeah,
basically all you have to you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun the
yeah,
reader.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
you just have to know more. You have to know enough to convince the reader that you know what you're doing.
yeah, and then it's like you stake out your own piece of turf, and then that's yours,
Yeah.
creatively. But let's talk about how Arabella works. Anyway, as David said, this is set in not the future, but the past, a full
Yes.
200 or so years ago.
1813.
Yes, and the solar system, there is no vacuum. It's like, how far out does that go? Is it just around the solar system, and is there space beyond it, or is
At
it
the time of
all
at the time of the book, they know is the atmosphere extends at least as far as the asteroids,
right?
where it gets too cold for humans to live.
Right, and so
Um,
so there are still
so
limits to the level of discovery there, but at least they're able to. They know what's in the immediate neighborhood, and they can get from place to place. They can actually go to the other worlds.
yes,
Which is
yes,
lovely, and they do it on sailing ships.
yes.
Um, Now let's talk about this because even though this is a completely fanciful reimagining of the solar system, obviously, you still, in a sense, have to make if you want this book to be a science fiction novel at heart and not a pure fantasy, you've still got to get the science at least plausible, right? I mean, you
Right.
have to know, it's like, how will you get from Earth to Mars in a solar system full of actual air on a ship
Right.
with sails?
And I am an analog writer, but I'm not the kind of analog writer who can work out all the equations behind everything,
No.
everything that's on the page. I have, as a technical writer, I learned to wing it. I learned to learn just enough about every new product that I was writing about to convince the readers yeah, as I said, you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the reader. You have
Hmm.
to know more than the reader does, but no more than that. You just have to
Hmm.
know enough to be plausible, to be a convincing expert. And so it's the same here. I started off with the idea that I was going to start off with one impossible premise, which was to fill the solar system with air, and everything else was going to be hard science fiction. And I would work out all the math and everything.
Hmm.
This turned out not to work.
Hmm.
Because for one thing, air isn't really all that transparent. And if there really was 8 light minutes of air between here and the sun, you wouldn't be able to see the sun. There'd just be sort of a vague red glow in that direction.
Right.
For another thing, if the solar system were full of air, the planets would probably have spiraled down into the sun long before life could evolve. Um, Eventually, I finally had to say, okay, this is a fantasy, but I'm still going to make the physics feel as plausible as possible. And
Hmm.
because I don't have a I don't have an education Yeah, I don't have a liberal arts degree. My degree is actually in architecture. I've never used it, but my father was a physicist. I did take real physics, not just rocks for jocks, in college. I'm a physics fan. I am familiar with a lot of the basic concepts, and I know, as I said, more than the reader. So I can make the physics feel plausible, even if at base it's nothing more than hand waving. I did a blog post for the Torforge blog titled Airfaring Technology of the 19th Century. And
Yeah,
that
I read
just
that. Just
yeah, that just went live today. And one of the two comments says, "Oh, this is great. You've obviously worked everything out in so much detail." And the other comment says, "This is so laughably wrong. I can't even critique it." And and the thing is that second commenter has the right of it. If you really know your aeronautics and your orbital dynamics and all that, I haven't done the math. And so what I have done is I know enough about physics to make it feel plausible. And the feedback that I've gotten on it indicates that I did achieve that I did make it feel plausible. And so it may not actually be true that the difference between putting up the sails and taking down the sails changes the air friction on the ship enough to do the things that I have happening. But it feels right. And the thing is that it makes it feel, it gives it that Patrick O'Brien feel of all of the details about how the ship works are right there on the page, even if most readers don't understand them.
right.
And so in this case, it may very well be that the readers who really do know what's going on will spot that I'm completely talking out of some orifice other than my mouth. But as a fiction writer, my job is to BS effectively.
Yeah.
And the reaction to the book indicates that I have gotten
the
away
whole
with it for
idea
most
is
readers.
that you want to give a sense that your world building is a thing that you have really thought through. So
And I
that
really
at least-
have.
So that at least the rules of your universe work as far as communicating a convincing and exciting story experience for the reader. That's really all you need to accomplish. Really,
That's
isn't
my goal.
it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, here's an anecdote. So one of my Clarion classmates married a guy who works for NASA, and I believe his job title is something like Small Bodies Planetary Defense Officer. I mean, this guy studies asteroids.
That's great. Is that on
Yeah.
his business card?
I may be wrong about planetary defense officer. NASA actually does have planetary defense officers. I'm not sure that's his job title,
That's
but
the coolest sounding job.
he's got a cool job title, and his work is all about asteroids. And so we were having dinner at I forget whether it's a Worldcon or World Fantasy, and there was something that I was trying to work out, trying to ask him about how do you navigate using only compass and sextant in 3 dimensions in zero gravity? Because I mean, I've done enough research on sextants to know that the way that you navigate with a sextant on the surface of the Earth really depends upon the fact that you know you're on the surface of the Earth. Because if all you do with a sextant is a sextant is basically just an instrument for measuring the angle between two things that are at a distance, right?
Yeah.
So all you do is you measure the angle between the horizon and the sun. If you know what time it is, then you know your longitude. If you measure that angle with precision and you know what time it is with precision, you can measure your longitude. And likewise, if you measure the angle between the horizon and the pole star, then you know your latitude. But this is all based on the idea that you're on the surface of a known defined sphere. Navigating with a sextant, it turns out a compass is worthless in midair. But navigating with sextant alone in 3 dimensions is a difficult problem. But I know that it is possible because they carried a sextant on the Apollo missions. They really did.
Okay.
Yeah. And I actually got a copy of the Apollo guidance computer. The Apollo guidance computer manual, which includes the guidance computer actually has a built-in sextant. In addition, they also carried a handheld sextant for backup. And so
there clearly was some sort of method that had been established for the use of it if they needed to. Yeah.
Well, and it turns out that the Apollo. In the Apollo spacecraft, the sextant actually still depended on the horizon. You would measure the angular distance between either the Earth's horizon or the Moon's horizon, depending on where you were, and that was how you navigated. But I still felt that it should be theoretically possible to navigate in 3 dimensions using only a sextant, but I didn't have the math. So I talked to this guy. We were at dinner. This guy who does asteroids for a living. And I said, so how would you navigate in 3 dimensions with a sextant? Only a sextant. And he says, well, why would you do that? And I said, well, okay, this takes place in an alternate world where the solar system is full of air. And he goes, what? And he said, but how could you and I said, it just is. Okay. People say this is an alternate history, no question.
Yeah.
This is a very alternate history, and people
Yeah.
say,
Oh, yes.
where's the divergence point? And the divergence point in this alternate
The Big
history is
Bang.
back at the dawn
Yeah.
the dawn of the solar
The
system.
accretion disk. Yeah.
Yeah. Although history traveled the same up until Newton saw a bubble rising from his bath and formulated the theory of universal buoyancy. That's actually the divergence point of history. So the
Okay.
real divergence point is way back in prehistory. But
Yeah.
history is the same up until Newton, and it begins to verge quite dramatically at around the time of this book. And by the time Arabella gets through with book 3, I think history will have diverged greatly. I mean, Arabella turns out to be a mover and shaker in history, which is not something that I had in mind when I wrote book 1.
Well, your characters just take on their own life, don't they?
They really do. I mean, I wrote Arabella as a standalone, and then when we sold it at Tor, they said, and we'll give you more money if you write 2 more books, and I said okay. So yeah,
like you say, you get sign of respect.
yeah, and also I knew that this was coming, and I had sketched out 2 more books. But I really do think there's 3 books about Arabella, and then there's an unknown number of additional stories to be told in this universe, because I've got 200 years of alternate history to play with.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when my critique partners were reading book 1, one of the questions they said was, how did they get here in the first place? Who was the first Englishman on Mars? And in thinking about the answer to that one, I wound up writing a story called The Wreck of the Mars Adventure, which is about the first Englishman on Mars, Captain Kidd. Yes, that Captain Kidd. And that story was published in Gardner Dozois and George R. R. Martin's anthology Old Mars. It's up on Starship Sofa as a podcast, and I believe they're going to reprint it on Tor.com as part of the marketing for Arabella. Okay. And then I have another story called End of the Silk Road, which takes place in 1939 in this same universe, and I call that my Venus Noir story. It's about a seedy gumshoe on Venus.
There we go. Okay.
Yeah. So there's 200 years of history. I want to do Franklin on Mars. I want to do Shackleton at Jupiter. I want to do the liberation of Mars. The Gandhi equivalent.
Yeah.
There's so many stories that can be told in this universe, with all based on one change, which is what if the sky was full of air?
that's it right there. That is great. Yeah. That's speculative fiction writing,
and everything else follows from that.
Yes, it's well, I definitely want the Noir Venus story. Absolutely. So,
it was in FNSF about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And
I may have some of those laying around then.
Yeah, and I will be recording it for Starship Sofa as soon as I get a chance, probably in the next week or 2.
Okay.
And I don't know when it'll be up. I don't know when it'll be up on Starship Sofa, but sometime in the next couple of months, I would say.
Okay, excellent. So then let's just get on really quickly as we're moving towards the finale here. Let's talk a little bit about whether or not you would consider, just from a basic marketing standpoint, to what degree Arabella might be a young adult novel or an all ages novel. I ask this because you and I are kind of from a generation in which young adult fiction was not this specific and aggressively marketed publishing category.
Yeah, the term young adult novel existed, but it wasn't really something you would see on a spine.
Yeah, and you would go to...
Except Daniel Pinkwater's book, Young Adult Novel.
Oh, okay. Well, right.
Yes.
That did what it said on the tin right there.
Yes, it really did.
But when we were young and boys and just getting into SF, you would find the Doc Smiths and the Heinlein juveniles right there on the same racks with all of the other science fiction, and it's like everybody read everything, and it wasn't really what it was today, and what I find that is different about like younger readers today, and BookTube is very much a community, that is predominantly young readers, which is great to see. It's a whole new generation of millennial readers, and they are super, super passionate about reading. But there is they have grown up with this idea that there's young adult and then there's adult, and it's maybe a bit of a nerd, just like, oh no, as the high school's over and I have to like be an adult now. It's like taking that step from the young adult to adult fiction is something that a lot of them are very intimidated about. And so, to what degree do you think? I mean, should these distinctions even matter? And is Arabella? I mean, she's what, 16, 17, and
16,
yeah,
yeah.
and when the book starts, and so she's clearly a young adult heroine. But the book is, I think, just being marketed as it's
Hmm.
not specifically as young adult, although Tor does market some books
Hmm.
as under the Tor teen imprint.
Yeah.
So, is this really a meaningful distinction at all? And should Arabella be a book that whether you're 16 or 86, you should just be able to grab it and dive in?
It
I
is
think you
a
should, yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different ways of answering that question.
Uh-huh.
For one thing, the difference between YA and adult SF is a marketing category, which, like the difference between science fiction and fantasy, is a way of drawing lines on a field which is fundamentally shades of gray.
Hmm.
And marketing categories are important because if you walk into a bookstore, you can't just say, these are all books, they're all good, pick one, have fun. You have to have some kind of guidance to help you find the books in the universe of books that are the kind of book you want to read. And so it's YA is a marketing category and it's as useful as any marketing category, which means that in some ways it's very useful and in other ways it actually gets in the way of finding the books that you want. Some people have said that YA, as we use the term today, basically means any book with a plot. Um, YA has some very hard lines drawn around it by marketing people and booksellers and librarians. Things like a book will be considered adult YA or middle grade based on the difference of a year in the age of the protagonist,
Hmm.
and of course not only the protagonist's age but what their concerns are. That if the protagonist is trying to find their place in the world, then that's and I may be wrong on this, but that's more a YA thing. Whereas if they're concerned with fitting in with their peers, that's more a middle grade thing. But if you say that this character is 17 years old, then that will be classed as YA, even if in the universe in which the story takes place, 17 years old is a fully fledged adult.
Hmm.
Um, so the marketing categories are artificial. They have their utility, but at the
Hmm.
same time, they're artificial and arbitrary in some ways.
And they're no
Um,
real determinant. They're nothing that determines, to what degree you personally will actually enjoy a book.
exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I read everything. I read everything when I was growing up, and as you say, we could read everything because there wasn't all that much to read.
Hmm.
There's a
There's
lot
that.
more
Yeah.
stuff to read now, and that's why we have an increasing number of categories.
Yeah.
I wrote Arabella as YA. I wrote it. I deliberately pitched it for a young adult audience for marketing purposes because YA is a if you can land a book in YA and have it be popular, then it will keep selling year after year after year. Whereas adult fiction, there's so much of it that it kind of tends to get swamped by the newer stuff. So there are marketing and career based reasons to want to write YA. The fact is, I had not read enough. I did my research. I read YA, but I had not read enough YA, and I don't have children, and it's been a lot of years since I was a young adult, and so I think it reads adult, despite the fact that I did as much as I could to make it be a YA book.
Hmm.
So even though I crafted it to be YA. Tor picked it up as an adult, and Tor picked it up for its adult line, and I was not surprised by this. On the other hand, I have plenty of kid readers who have read it and loved it.
Hmm.
Um, at the
Even
Western,
though the
so
prose style is closer to that Regency fiction, deliberately,
yes,
as
deliberately so, yeah.
than
But
what you would see in conventional YA fiction. Which is,
exactly, and the issues that she faces are this is a straightforward adventure story. It almost
hmm.
doesn't matter how old she is.
Yeah. And
Although my publicist said, "Have you read The Adventures of Charlotte Doyle?" And I said, "No, I had not." And I read The Adventures of Charlotte Doyle, and it's a fabulous story. And you could totally describe Arabella as The Adventures of Charlotte Doyle in space. Even though I
okay.
hadn't read the book, the two of them are doing the same things. The thing is, the reason I have a young female protagonist is because young female protagonists have so many strikes against them in terms of their power in the world that their way is difficult. And that gives them more stuff to overcome. And that makes them a more interesting protagonist, more relatable
Hmm.
protagonist. That's why she's young. That's why she's female.
Hmm.
Um, But at the same time, given that I had chosen a female protagonist, I'm examining it and actually interrogating the attitudes of the Regency toward young women. And by
Yeah.
dressing as a boy and having all these adventures, she's actually fighting against it. Uh,
Mhm.
I mean, as by making Arabella a tomboy, I'm actually kind of making things easier for myself because I wasn't as interested in the Jane Austen side of things as the Patrick O'Brien side of things. So by making my young girl dress up as a boy and having her be a tomboy, very much outside of her society, I made it a book that was easier for me to write. Of course, in subsequent books, she does wind up getting involved in society, and I've had to do a ton of research on that. Yeah, I could. Yeah, the astrophysics, I could,
Yeah.
spitball back of the envelope.
Right.
When it comes to Regency society, I need tons of research and help from my more Regency knowledgeable friends.
Yeah. But you're right.
I yeah.
She does have very relatable concerns. I mean, she's worried about her brother for reasons that
Hmm.
we won't go into here, and so she's very devoted to her family, and she feels the sting of betrayal very strong. But at the same time, she knows that she knows who she wants to be as a person,
Hmm.
and the culture in which she's being raised does not allow that latitude for young women. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
I describe her as a Patrick O'Brien girl stuck in a Jane Austen world.
mm.
Yeah.
So. All right, so then I guess up next you have, I guess Arabella will now be a trilogy.
Yes.
And then, as you've mentioned, I guess following that, there could be any number of tales in the in Arabella's universe.
Yes, which I call the
Um,
Newton's bubble universe.
uh-huh. But is there
Yes.
anything maybe just a little different, a little strange, niggling at your brainstem that may see, the light of day at some point? Even different, even stranger ideas to take you off on a whole nother course in your writing?
I am currently working on another story for Wild Cards,
Okay,
George R. R. Martin's long-running superhero prose series,
right.
and I have been very fortunate to be allowed to write about a long-standing Wild Cards character,
Hmm.
and which one would be a spoiler, but I've written this story. I've gotten feedback from George. I said earlier that having a really excellent editor can substitute for having a multiple critiques. And George is the best editor I've ever worked with. It's his years in television
Oh
that give
yeah.
him this amazing ability to pinpoint what's wrong with the story. And what he said in response to my first draft was, "Will require a major rewrite, but I cannot disagree with it." It's like, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
That story really doesn't work, and that thing you've suggested will really make it work.
Hmm.
So that's something that I
That's
need to be doing
so
this
talk.
week, along with everything else this month, along with everything else that's happening this month. And that's what I'm working on now. Once I mean, I just finished the first draft of book two, and I'm awaiting my edit letter on that. And then book three is going to have to come along pronto because it took me 2 years to write book two. It took me 2 years to write book one. I thought that I would be able to do book two in a year. As it happened, what with circumstances intervening, it wound up taking me 2 full years to write book two. And now I've got 1 year to write book three, and I've never written a novel in 1 year before.
Well, there you go.
So,
That's the next challenge, I
yeah.
guess.
So while I'm busy promoting book one and editing book two, I also have to write book three in a year,
Ah,
along with all the other things that life throws at you. So
yeah.
it's going to be interesting. But
Well,
you
hey,
know what I said for all of those years, 10 years I
yeah.
tried to sell a novel. And in all that time, I kept saying, Lord, just give me a better class of problems. And now I've got it. Because
Hmm.
no matter what level of success you have achieved in this field, you can always say, oh, I wish I wish, okay, yes, I've sold a short story, but I wish I could sell a short story to a bigger market. Oh, well, I've sold short stories to bigger markets, but why don't I ever get an award nomination? Oh, I've been nominated for awards, but I wish I could win an award, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I've
That
by
goalpost just
selling,
keeps moving.
yeah, and we move it for ourselves.
Hmm.
And so by selling this series now, I've definitely gotten myself in for a better class of problems.
Well, that's good.
Yeah,
I mean,
these are problems that I want,
yeah,
and
they're
it
the
is
best
going to
problems
be
to have.
very, very busy in this next month with the rollout of the first book. But this is all stuff that I've been asking for, and I hope that everything will work out.
So do I. So do I. And you've asked for it, and it has come. And as I said, Arabella of Mars arrives in stores tomorrow from Tor Books. So keep an eye out for that. All the relevant links are below. Amazon. My review is up by now. So Look for it. I want to thank David so much for his time tonight, for doing this interview. Thanks very much to Tor Books for setting this up. And I hope you have great success with the book and
Thank
the
you very much.
sequels. And as always, everybody, thank you so much for joining us tonight on SFF180. As always, hit that like button if you enjoyed watching. Share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends. And above all, please subscribe if you haven't done so. That is how SFF180 grows as a channel. And until I see all of you next time, thank you, take care, and happy reading.
Thank you.